Alright, hello my friends, and welcome to Character Creation Tips for Baldur's Gate 3. Today I'm going to be telling you what the best character to play through Tactician mode is and why. Now, before we begin, I should say that the best character is the one that you have the most fun with. I'm not here to tell you how to enjoy the game, obviously, that's up to you. What I will tell you is what the most powerful character and the one that will give you the smoothest ride through the hardest difficulty is. In order to do that, we are of course going to make a custom character, so let's switch over to that. There's a couple principles that we need to take into account when we're picking what character, what race, what class, and what skills we're going to select. First up, and the most important blanket principle in Dungeons & Dragons optimization and in Baldur's Gate 3 is that spells are better than martial stuff. 5th edition, which is the rule set that Baldur's Gate 3 is based on, has gone a long way towards closing the gap, but essentially martial characters scale linearly. If you level up a barbarian, such as for example this character, they will gain additional damage, additional to hit chance, maybe an extra attack. Effectively, they get better at the thing that they already do. Spellcasters get new options. Many of those options, without ever allowing the barbarian to even roll a die, are going to end the fight immediately. The classic example of this is the fly spell or similar spells that allow you to attack from a position where the barbarian can't get to you. A melee character just can't do anything if you are flying up in the air above them. Spellcasters get so many ways to just completely obviate encounters, and you have so many ways to use your spells creatively, that the way in which they scale is exponentially different from and more powerful than the way in which martial characters scale. So no matter what, the best character in the game is going to be a spellcaster of some kind. Which spellcaster is a little more complicated. So let's take a quick look at all of the classes. Of the spellcasting classes, we have access to bards, clerics, druids, sorcerers, warlocks, and wizards. Paladins and rangers get some spells, but many fewer, so we're going to discount them for the moment, although I'll come back to them later just to give you a quick update on those classes as well. In Baldur's Gate, one thing that we need to look at, and I'm going to skip ahead just a little bit to the character's abilities, is which skills we want to have on our main character. A standard party is going to need access to a few different things. One, you're going to need some way to open locks, so that requires you to have Sleight of Hand on some character, or the knock spell, which is another way in which spellcasting characters get to completely obsolete melee characters, because that will allow you to open locks. You'll need some way to deal with traps, but Larian has helpfully provided a ton of environmental options for dealing with traps, so for the most part you can either just take the damage, or ignore the trap in some way by placing a block in front of it, breaking the tripwire with an object, putting something on top of a vent, and so on. Those abilities don't have to be on your main character. In fact, the only abilities that do have to be on your main character are ones that are used in conversations, because there are some conversations that only your main character is going to be involved in, where you'll need to make skill checks, and characters that aren't involved in a conversation, characters that didn't initiate that conversation, can't make checks on behalf of a character in the conversation in Baldur's Gate 3. This, I think, is mostly done for multiplayer and differs from tabletop Dungeons & Dragons in a way that I personally don't like, but that's what's in front of us. That means that your main character is going to need access to one of the 3 conversation skills at minimum. Those are Deception, Intimidation, and Persuasion. Those all scale off of Charisma, so we're going to want a character that is able to use the high Charisma that we naturally want in order to have access to conversation skills as an effective tool in the arsenal of the character. To a lesser extent, we also probably want some of the knowledge skills on our main character, because those do also often come up in conversations, so Arcana, History, Nature, and Religion. And Insight certainly can't hurt as well, because that's another one of the conversation skills. But for the most part, the most important thing is making sure that we have our conversational skills set up on our character, one of the 3 charisma skills. We will also need perception and survival somewhere in the party, but those can be on anybody, they don't have to be on the main character. Given that we want to have high charisma on our character, we should pick a character class that uses charisma. Luckily, that lines up very well with a lot of the casting classes. Of the casting classes, bards, paladins, sorcerers, and warlocks all use their charisma in some way. Warlocks, sorcerers, and bards all scale off of charisma. It's really good. In order to make use of the charisma of these characters, we are going to build them as main casters using the charisma stat, putting charisma at 17 so that we can make conversational checks and also have access to full casting. Of these 3 full casters, we can immediately discount the Warlock. Warlocks are basically sorcerers, but with more damage and better armor, but fewer spells. Spells are so much better than damage that we don't want to trade off armor and... we don't want to trade off spells for armor and damage. We just want to take as many spells as we can get. So the 2 best classes in this game, because of how the conversations are structured and because of our desire for spells, are bards and sorcerers. I'll come back to which of these we actually want to pick in a second, because we're going to take a quick look at the races. One reason that we don't care about the armor that the sorcerers have is that many of the races in this game have armor proficiencies. So if we pick the half-elf, for example, we get the Civil Militia trait, which gives you armor proficiency in light armor and shields. The light armor is going to be 13 armor by itself, usually, and the shield will give you +2 for a base AC of 15, which is way better than just the light armor proficiency that the Warlock gets. Similarly, a Githyanki gets access to medium armor proficiency, no shields, but also 15 base AC. So if you were to look at Lae'zel's starting armor, it gives her 15 AC plus 2 maximum AC from dexterity. That's really powerful in and of itself, and significantly outstrips the armor you get from mage armor or from wearing light armor. Essentially, I think then there are 2 options for character classes, for character races. You can attempt to go for the light armor and shields route, or you can go for the medium armor route using Githyanki or the shield dwarf. The dwarf we can again discount because the other most important thing in this game is positioning. Positioning is much harder when you only move 25 feet instead of 30 feet, like the full-size races do. So we can pretty much immediately discount any of the races that lose access to some movement speed. Between the half-elf or human and the Githyanki, I suggest that you favor the Githyanki. This isn't actually visible in their initial character trait, but there are 2 particularly powerful reasons to favor the Githyanki. One is the Astral Knowledge skill, gaining proficiency in all skills of a chosen ability, and you can use this in reaction to making a skill check that uses that ability, allows you to gain a huge boost whenever you need to make a knowledge check, whenever you might need to make an insight check, whenever you might need to make any form of check that you don't have trained. Secondly, the Githyanki at level 5 gets access to once per day Misty Step, which is a bonus action teleport. This means that they have even better positioning abilities than every other character race. So they can use the natural positioning bonus that you get from being a spellcaster, plus the positioning bonus for being a Githyanki, and end up with a ton of additional movement options compared to every other character. Of the 2 classes that we have chosen, we basically have to choose between Bard and Sorcerer. We've already talked about 2 of the major things that the Dungeons & Dragons uses to determine what the most powerful character is: positioning and access to effects that completely obviate fights. The third one is action economy. This is basically how many actions can you stuff into a single turn. Well, the Sorcerer gets some options to do that. Because the Sorcerer at level 3 gains access to the Quicken spell metamagic, and because in Baldur's Gate 3 there is no restriction on how many spells you can cast in a turn, the Sorcerer basically gets 2 turns for every 1 turn every other character gets, because they can cast 2 entire spells. So, while the Bard does get some off-turn options, like cutting words for the Lore Bard, and is still an extremely powerful choice, the Sorcerer's action economy makes them an even more powerful choice. They get more spells than any other character, and they get to cast them more frequently in a fight than any other character does. So the optimal choice for character to play on Tactician mode is the Githyanki Sorcerer. This is going to serve you the best. There's a couple other things that we can add onto this, what subclass we want to pick. Of the Sorcerer, we get an option for 3 different subclasses. We get to choose Wild Magic, Draconic Bloodline, or Storm Sorcery. Now, you might be wondering, hey, I am going to choose Storm Sorcery. Now, you might be wondering, hey, you just said damage spells aren't great, damage isn't great. Why would you pick the damage-focused character class? Well, the reason is the level 1 feature of the Sorcerer is Tempestuous Magic. After you cast a level 1 spell or higher, you can use your bonus action to fly without provoking opportunity attacks until the end of your turn. This gives you incredible positioning options and allows you to escape melee enemies, allows you to jump up onto beams or unreachable locations, means that you never have to worry about enemies getting into melee pretty much. Huge bonus. So even though the rest of the subclasses' abilities are not enormous, the Tempestuous Magic feature of the Storm Sorcerer puts it head and shoulders above the other 2. Draconic Bloodline, one of the things it gets is armor, and we already get that from being a Githyanki, and the other thing it gets is HP, which is quite good, but is not going to save you as much damage as simply being out of reach. And Wild Magic is just too unreliable. When we're playing on difficult modes in a game, you really want to make sure that everything is under your control. Nothing should be out of your control. Of your beginning spells, you should almost certainly have access to Mage Hand. It's extremely good in this game. You can use it to perform all sorts of weird actions that you wouldn't otherwise think that you would be able to. Another really important one is you should probably just take Firebolt. I did say that damage isn't super important, but having an option to do damage when you don't have anything more important on your turn to do is really valuable. The other really important one is Minor Illusion. This causes enemies to go walk to it, which means that you can put them onto bridges, near hazardous locations, into traps. For a cantrip that doesn't cost you any spell, incredibly powerful. And finally, I don't think it really matters what the last one you pick is. You could take Friends and use it to attempt to make more checks, although the target might accuse you of enchanting them. I haven't seen this one come up that often, but it does say it in the description, so your mileage may vary. I think the last one that you pick is not incredibly important. Blade Ward is also pretty good if you need to buff an allied creature that you aren't currently in a fight with, and that is something that does come up frequently. You can often trick 2 opposed factions into fighting one another, and then you just buff one of them, which doesn't count as hostile, and Blade Ward doesn't actually cost you an action to do that, and gives them an enormous buff for 2 rounds, so that might be the best 4th option. I think at that point it's sort of like to taste. Of your spells, I think you should really select Shield is going to be really important, but the other one doesn't matter that much. Combined with your 15 base AC from having medium armor proficiency, and then you will also end up with at least +1 dexterity, you are going to end up having a effective AC of 22, which makes you extremely difficult to hurt when you cast Shield. For the last spell, I think you're probably going to want to go with like Magic Missile or something early on. It's really the level 2 spells where you get access to the extremely powerful effects, but the other spells of the Sorcerer are all fun, and you can kind of experiment, see what works best for you. Finally, we're going to take Storm Sorcery. For our background, we want to make sure that we have access to some of the Charisma skills, and you can just kind of look at which background you want. Deception from Charlatan is good, and this gives you Sleight of Hand, along with your reasonable Dexterity. That's not a bad one to take. Deception and Stealth from Criminal is also really good. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do with Stealth. Any of these backgrounds are pretty good. Insight and Persuasion covers 2 of the skills that you want, so definitely take a look at the backgrounds and decide where you're missing skills. For your ability array, we will finally just make sure that you have all of your stats at reasonable levels, and the most important thing is just making sure that you have your dexterity up to 14 to make your AC at least +2, you want your charisma at 17, and you want your constitution at 15 so that you can spend your first feat at level 4 on increasing your constitution to 16 and your charisma to 18. Alright, so that is my pick for the single best character for Tactician mode for Baldur's Gate 3. I hope you guys have enjoyed this little look at how to construct a character, and I am in fact going to be putting this into practice if people enjoy this. Definitely check out the channel in shortly because we will be running through a playthrough using this exact character. Alright my friends, thank you for watching, and of course you can subscribe to my channel, leave a comment, all the algorithm stuff, and I'll catch you next time. GG.